there's a statement that most of us are pretty familiar with, and it's called "Mother Knows." Okay, well, who said that? Well, Kendall, that one mom right there, she was like on it. It's like, boom. Did any of the rest of you ever heard that statement? Anybody ever heard that? Okay, you're just still in that awake row left, so everybody else, you have to wake up now. You know, my talking row over here is gone, so you got to over to kids' church, so you got to have to wake up. Mother knows best. We're pretty familiar with that, and you know, I would have to say my experience has been in my growing up years with my mom, and being married now almost 35 years to Vanjie. I pretty much have to say, I think I agree with that. Mom knows best. In fact, I find myself, now we're raising our second set of kids, and I find myself so frequently saying, "What did your mom say?" And you know, and I'm just going to go ahead and throw this in, gentlemen. That's not only practical, there's a tremendous amount of wisdom in that for you. You know, I'm just giving you a hint here in case you hadn't caught on to that one yet. There's a lot of wisdom in that for you in a whole lot of ways. But even though you could say, well, you do it to get brownie points or something else, I'm just going to have to tell you, really and truly, when I say that, when I ask that question, I really almost 98, 99% of the time mean it. Now, sometimes I pretty much already know what she said, and I may know what I'm going to say, but you know, there's just a little safety in saying, "What'd your mom say?" And so the question that I want to ask you this morning is, since we all, even though many of you didn't admit it till late, know that statement that mom knows best, have you considered lately and carefully considered it on Monday afternoon, on Wednesday morning, on Friday at payday, on wherever you are in your week? Have you considered that God knows best? And I know we all know the church answer, okay? We all know the right answer. We all know, well, absolutely. I mean, and if we're sitting here this morning, there's a high chance, at least whether you're absolutely a follower of Jesus or not, there's still a high chance that you certainly would know what you think the right answer would be to that question. Does God really know best? And so I want to just make the statement this morning as we start. I'm just going to tell you that from my perspective, as I've read the Bible, as I've walked with Jesus, as I've endeavored to build a relationship with God, as I've endeavored to interact with many people who are on that same journey and those who are coming to that journey, that I have a firm conviction that God knows best. Now, when I say that, don't mistake me for saying that I think it always looks like God knows best, or that always sounds like God knows best, or that it always feels like God knows best. Because I have found in my own journey many times questioning whether or not God really knew best. And what we're going to look at this morning is a story, one of God's great stories from the Bible. And if you have never fallen in love with the great stories of the Bible, if you didn't grow up hearing those stories read to you or in Sunday school or in children's church, having those stories told to you, we're going to be walking through some of the great ones over these next weeks. And today is one of those great ones. And I just need to tell you that in the midst of this story, you're going to see why people might question whether God knows best. But at the end of the day, I still want to venture to say, I think we'll come to the conclusion, yes, God knows best. And so let's go ahead and grab your scripture sheet beside you. We're going to be talking about whenever God led the children of Israel out of Egypt and across the Red Sea. And so we have, if you notice on your scripture, you got 2 pages worth of scriptures. We got a lot of scripture. We're going to have to kind of put it in gear and start rolling, okay? And so let's do that together. Now let's begin at right under where it says scripture lesson, verse 17 of Exodus chapter 13. And we're going to be working through part of that chapter, part of 14, most of 14, and then a little bit of 15, Lord willing. So buckle yourself up. Make sure you've got your caffeine in motion, and let's roll. So, verse 17, we're not going to read it all at one setting, but we're going to get started here. Now, when Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, even though it was near. For God said, the people might change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. Hence, God led the people around by the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea, and the sons of Israel went up in martial array from the land of Egypt. And depending on kind of arrayed for battle or whatever, you might have a different translation that says it different, but basically they were going out like an army from Egypt. Now, I want to say a couple things before we dive into the story and before we start breaking it down a little bit for us. And that is that, first of all, I would like to encourage you to be aware that whenever we're dealing with the Bible, and say particularly even like the Old Testament, where we're dealing with these stories that are stories of history that took place, and then we're saying, well, what does that have to do with me today? How does that apply to my life today? Then I think we have to be careful not to over-apply or to under-apply, and I'll explain that. It is history, but it's not just history, because if it was just history, the story would just be about some Egyptians drowning. And I can't see where that would bring a whole lot of benefit just to come here and announce today that in history there were a bunch of Egyptians that drowned, and Pharaoh and it was his armies and that kind of thing in the Red Sea. That wouldn't seem to be a great story in and of itself. But the question then is, if the Bible is living and active, is there something for us in this? How do we fit into the story? How are we a part of the story? Can we find ourselves in the story? And what I want to say is, absolutely, we find ourselves in the story. What we can't say is that we're the star of the story, because really, in the whole Bible, Jesus is the star of the story. But we can find ourselves in it. Now, here's some of the caution side of it. Whenever we start saying these people, they're up against this Red Sea, and they're standing there, and they're surrounded by an army behind them. They have the Red Sea in front of them. They have the wilderness over here. I mean, there's just nowhere for them to go. And then God leads them through. I just need to inform you that probably the headache you have today isn't your Red Sea. Okay? Sometimes people over-apply. They want everything, every obstacle they face, every opposition they face, everything this is my Red Sea. Tax season is not necessarily your Red Sea. It might be difficult, it might be hard, it might be challenging, whatever, but it's not necessarily, Pharaoh isn't your boss. Don't be asking God to drown him. Say, and the person sitting next to you isn't Pharaoh. Sometimes we just we get ourselves so into the story that we start picturing everything that's happened around us just like that. So there are ways God wants to put you in this story. And so track with me and let's see how we do that. But what I want to tell you is that God's word is eternal, it's living, it's active. And it does include us. And God invites us into his stories and invites us to see how he works. And if there's anything in particular that I want to convey to you today, it's how God works and how he operates so that we can have a better perspective when we see things happen in our lives. And we can say, well, in that situation, it seemed like God acted this way. He acted according to this. And we have a much better understanding then of how he might work in our lives. Now, in this story, this beginning part of the story that we read, there are a couple of interesting factors that we already see taking place. Whenever they left Egypt, God didn't lead them through the land of the Philistines. And it says here clearly he didn't, because even though that was the easy way to get to the Red Sea, that was like the most direct route. He didn't take them there because of the fact that they would have to do battle. And you understand, these people had a slave mindset. They'd been slaves for generations now. And so all they knew was to be a slave. And so for them to go out there and the very first thing they do is hit a battle and have to do battle, God's saying they're going to turn around and run. They're going to run back to Egypt. They're not going to do this battle thing. And so they're probably going to change their minds when they see war, and they're going to return to Egypt. So God took them around by the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea, and so he took them this long way around to the Red Sea. I want to ask you a question. Have you ever felt like God's taken you a long way around? And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, okay? But I just want to have that in your mind here. Sometimes God's way doesn't seem like the best way. Now, he knew they weren't ready. He knew they weren't ready to fight. Even though they came out arrayed as an army, he knew they weren't ready to do battle. Do you suspect that God knows when we're not ready for something? And he might put it on pause or on hold or keep us away from that or hold us back so that we don't become overwhelmed by something we're not ready for? I think so. See, the question we have to ask, I don't know if I've already made this statement, but let's play with this a little bit. Is God's way always the best way? Is it? Well, let's put it this way. If you are talking about efficiency and convenience, God's way may not always be the best way. God's way may not always be the most efficient from our perspective and the most convenient. And if you look throughout history, you can see God's less interested in necessarily making our lives convenient than he is in building character within us or than he is in accomplishing his purpose. We think, we live in this culture that basically is always the most efficient is always best. The most convenient is always best. And, we have stores about on every corner of every city and every little burg called convenience stores because, and we're all willing to pay a higher price. We go in there, it's going to cost you $1 more or $2 more or $3 more, but it's the convenience. So we're people of convenience. I just need to tell you, if convenience is your top priority or if efficiency is your top priority, God's way may not be the best way. God's way is not always the best way if it's about us having the shortest distance between 2 points. In this situation, we see the shortest distance between the 2 points would have been to go through the Philistines' territory. God said, no, you're not ready for that. So we're going to go the long way around. God's way isn't always the best if all you want is maximum happiness in this moment. In other words, if you're not willing to wait, if you're not willing to delay any gratification, then God's way isn't always the best way. God's way isn't always the best way if you want what you want, when you want it, how you want it, where you want it, and who you want it with, and everything else, all the other whatevers you can put in there. But I just need to state to you, just because God's way is not always the most efficient or convenient, it's not always the closest point from A to B, it's not always meaning that you have your maximum happiness in this given moment, I still want to contend with you that his way is best. See, sometimes when you go God's way, you have to go through some steps and processes that we need to go through before we can achieve what God has for us to achieve. Sometimes we think God is holding back a blessing from us when he's keeping us from a battle because we're not ready for the battle that would be necessary for us to get the blessing. These guys were slaves. Yes, they were equipped for battle in some sense. But I just want to say, can we just say in our hearts, thank you, God, that God, when we're ready. You know when we're ready. Do you know that God knows when you're ready for a boyfriend or a girlfriend? God knows when you're ready for marriage. God knows when you're ready for that promotion. See, we're always ready for everything. We always are sure we're ready. I'm always ready. I was ready to drive when I was 12. I don't know what in the world they were thinking, making laws. You had to wait till you were 16. I was ready. My mom let me drive a car around on our little land there when I'd wash it and stuff. Man, I knew how to drive. What are you talking about? I had this attitude early on. So you know why I have problems with the cops today. But I don't know what they build these rules for, these laws, I know what I'm doing when it comes to driving. Come on. See, we know. We know everything. We already have it figured out. I don't know if your kids have ever made you tried to act like you're the dumbest thing since, blocks of wood or something, that you're like, you don't know anything. They know everything. And I mean, Hunter, I love him to pieces. He's a great kid and everything. But man, that kid is a know-it-all. He knows it all. He knows everything. And since driving's one of my deals, this is where we really do butt heads a little bit. I'm pulling out and turning one way. He goes, why are you turning that way? I'm like, why do you care? Because he'll say, because that's not the way to go. I said, how do you know where I'm going? Well, aren't you going wherever? I might be or may not be. But bottom line is, I'm the one driving. Shut up and enjoy the ride. Enjoy being a little kid, you know? Quit trying to tell me what to do. You're 7 years old, for Pete's sake. There was one week, I think I must have said, for Pete's sake and crying out loud, 100 times. And it had to do with him trying to tell me how to drive. For Pete's sake and crying out loud, when are you going to keep your mouth shut and let me do the driving? Like, I said, man, just enjoy being a kid. Just enjoy it. And you know what I think God wants to say to us sometimes? What in the world are you thinking? Why do you think you always have to go the shortest route? Why do you always think it has to be the most convenient? Why do you think it always has to work out just the way you think it ought to work it out? Could you relax and let me be God? Could you relax and let me be God? See, God's way isn't always the best for things like we've talked about, and convenience, but it is always the best for purpose. Always the best for purpose in life. You know, we can jump ahead a little bit. I'm not going to read the last two verses in that first, where the next paragraph there. I just have it there for information about how God led them. We all know that, but I wanted to just have it there in case you wanted to look at it. But let's move on down to the next section. Pardon me. Still struggling a little bit with some of this nonsense we're all dealing with a little bit. I'll try to minimize my hacking. It says, now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, tell the sons of Israel to turn back and camp before Pi-hahiroth. Don't look that up, okay? I think that's right, but anyway, I tried. Between Migdol and the sea. And you shall camp in front of Baal-zephon, opposite it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the sons of Israel, they are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. Thus I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after them, and I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. And they did so. So here we see a couple things going on. That God is saying, I'm about ready to do something that's going to bring me glory. Do you know that in your life there are times whenever it's not as much about you as it is about God? Can we let him get glory in our lives? Can we let it be about him and not always about us? Can we do that? Because he's saying here, I'm gonna be honored. I'm going to receive glory, depending on what translation you're looking at, through Pharaoh and all his army. And they're going to know that I am God. So God's purpose here is to, in what's going on with Pharaoh and the Egyptians, isn't so much about the children of Israel, is it about God receiving glory and being lifted up in the eyes of the Egyptians. They're going to see the reality of who God is. They've kind of tromped on him long enough, and he's going to raise himself up, and he's going to be honored. That's really the point. Oftentimes, what God is doing in our lives, I don't mean that he doesn't care what's happening. He cared very much. These people were being set free from slavery. A big deal was going on for them. This was very important in their lives. But the bigger purpose at this moment had more to do with God's glory. And there are oftentimes the things that happen, transpire in our lives, have to do with God's glory. It have to do with him being honored by how we're living our lives, by how we're functioning as individuals, how we function as a family of God. And so in this, if you notice, when God is telling Moses what's going on, how they're going to wander around here a little bit and hang out in the wilderness and act like they're lost, basically, that there's not like this really big strategy. I mean, other than wander around like you're lost here in the wilderness a little bit. And but here's the result we're after. I'm going to receive glory. I'm going to show these people that I'm God. I'm going to reveal to them I am God. That stuff Those kinds of conversations with God frustrate the daylights out of me sometimes. Because see, what I'm wanting God to do is to give me all the steps and all the reasons for the steps, and not just for his glory, but how am I going to benefit from this, how other people are going to benefit, I kind of want the whole prescription. And God just gave Moses this kind of generic sense of like, wander around, they're going to think you're lost, they're going to come out here after you, and I'm going to receive the glory. And that's what was going on. Now, if you look at verse on down a little bit further in the verse here, it says, when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart toward the people. And they said, what is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made his chariot ready and took his people with him. And he took 600 select chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he chased after the sons of Israel as the sons of Israel were going out boldly. Then the Egyptians chased after them with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen, his army, and they overtook them camping by the sea. Besides, here we are again, Pi-Hahiroth, in front of Baal-Zephon. Now, don't get worried about the names of the places. We just know they were camping out there near the Red Sea and in this situation, okay? Let me go ahead and read just a little bit further here before I start commenting, because this is getting very interesting to me. I hope it is to you too. As Pharaoh drew near, the sons of Israel looked, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. And they, just like you would, became very frightened. So the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us in this way, bringing us out of Egypt? We're going to stop there for a minute. Let me ask you this question. Has there ever been a time when God is leading you away from something? It could be away from a habit, away from a sin, away from a problem, away from a relationship, and you look up and you see something that you thought you had defeated moving back in on you. See, the children of Israel were fleeing Egypt. They were being set free. They were going to a promised land. They had gathered up and they were marching as an army to the Red Sea. But now all of a sudden, they look over their shoulder and they see the very thing they thought they were leaving coming to get them. And it makes them question if they should have left where they were. It makes them say, you know, at least we would have died of old age, or at least died under the pressure of working hard. There weren't enough graves in Egypt. I mean, you heard a complaint. They're saying, they're basically saying, we are going to die. We see them coming. We're going to die. We're not going to make it. We just made fools out of ourselves. We've come out here. Now we're going to be buried out here in this desert, in this wilderness. And so it makes them question if they should have left where they were. If you have never been in the place where you've wondered if it was wise for you to leave where you were, then it's a chance that you've not been on the journey very long. You know, people who look back and they see this habit, this problem, this situation coming back at them again, going, I thought I was past that. I thought I had conquered that. I thought it was over that. I thought it was done. And here I see it coming again. If you see that, and if you're not careful in that moment when you see that, then you may even begin to question, what is this struggle all about? If I'm just going to end up embarrassing myself here again by ended up being where I was before, why did I even start? You know, I'm going to make a statement. I'm not saying you need to write it down, but I would say you can feel free to go ahead and write it down anyway, whether you think you should or not. But It can be easier to live in the predictability of slavery than in the uncertainty of freedom. Can I say that again? Because I'm thinking you might want to write it down. It can be easier to live in the predictability of slavery than in the uncertainty of freedom. You know, I've been close up with someone in recent weeks who's come out of prison after almost 5 years and spent a fair amount of time with him. And when you've been in a situation where you're told what to do every day, where to go, what to eat, what not to eat, everything else, and you walk into a grocery store and there's so many options, it can be very overwhelming. All of a sudden, there's just all these options. Everything's there. Everything. It's like, it's almost mind-boggling. And so I'm not saying that anybody in that setting would say, hey, I'd rather go back to the predictability of prison. But what I am saying is we can become conditioned to the point, in particular when I'm talking about spiritually here, where the predictability of our slavery to sin is more comfortable or easier to live in the uncertainty of freedom in Christ. You know, I can picture these Egyptians. They're going to Moses. They're saying, look, God, look, Moses, you know, we kind of got the idea that, you know, you want to take the long way around. And so we're doing the loop with you. You know, we're going on the loop. We're taking the loop. Even kind of hanging out here and wandering around the wilderness a little bit. You know, we'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But then we saw the Egyptians behind us. And we're beginning to wonder, Moses, do you have a clue what you're doing? You took us on this big loop around, and then we're kind of wandering around out here a little bit, and here they are. They're coming to get us. It's over. We're done. And now, understandably, Moses had a little bit of insight that they didn't have. God had said some things to Moses they did not have. But here's what God assured Moses of, and that is that he had brought these Egyptians out here to deal with them. He was not bringing the Egyptians out for them to harm Israel. He was bringing the Egyptians out to deal with them. And he also was assuring Moses he didn't bring all these people out here to kill them. That was not his purpose, his plan at all. It's so easy for us to misunderstand God's purposes and his plans in our lives. You know, we have a lot of foreknowledge. We can read this story. Most of us already kind of know the ending. We already know what happened. And so, but understand, Moses didn't know what was going to happen. He only knew what God had told him was going to happen. It hadn't happened yet. It was still in front of him. He still had this massive city of people with him out here who were very uncertain, very weak because they were used to being slaves, and very scared and very unsure. And they're not the one that God had been speaking personally to, even though they were the ones whose prayers had gone up. And God had said, I've heard the last prayer I need to hear with regard to these people. And so he goes to Moses and he begins the journey of starting to release these people. But Moses had some insight they didn't have. And also, even though Moses had that insight, he also had not seen it happen yet. Verse 12, it says, and going on and reading, is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Have you ever wondered whether or not this whole thing of following Jesus and working on cleaning your life up, working on building character, if it's worth it? You know, sometime you might say, I think my life might be better without God. And you say, well, Pastor Rod, you shouldn't say that in church, that people might think that. Well, if you thought that thought, you go ahead and polish your halo while I talk to the real people, okay? See, some people might think you're sitting there and you're watching one of your coworkers cheat their way to the top, and you're stuck, and you're going, doing this thing right, going by all the rules isn't working. It's working for them to get to the top, and they're cheating their way there. You know, someone who's single this morning might say, you know, there aren't any good guys in the church either. I might as well go to a bar and pick one up. Here come those chariots. See, here come those chariots. They're coming up and they're going. And you're thinking, this isn't working. I don't know why I ever started walking with God in the first place. I don't know why I ever started. Everybody said this is a better life. This is a good life. This is a better, I've had some trouble and hardship ever since I've started following God. I'm wondering if I should go back to Egypt. I'm wondering if I should go back and be a slave to this over here or that over there. I'm wondering. I'm not so sure if following God's all it's cracked up to be. You know, they're fussing at Moses, but they're really questioning God. And I'm not trying to be too hard on them, but the other side of it is this, that if we're not careful, we'll only see things through the immediate eyes that we have instead of looking through the eyes of faith. One of the beautiful things about Moses being a part of this story and being kind of the key figure in this story is this. Moses was a failed human being. He had failed miserably. And we can look at him as an example who also trusted deeply. Here's a person who had a history of failure, had a history of running from God, and yet at the same time now he's leading the charge and leading it magnificently. We won't be Moses. Most of us won't be Moses, but I will tell you this. What we will do is get to learn from his example and apply some of the lessons that he learned into our lives. Now, you might say, if I didn't forgive my enemies, if I didn't let that person off the hook, if I didn't treat people with kindness, I'd like to be mean. I'd like to be ugly to someone sometime. Look at verse 13. Verse 13 says this. But Moses said to the people, do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. Don't you love that verse, those verses? Those are awesome, awesome verses. Stand still, stand by, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. And these Egyptians that you're seeing coming up on your back, you'll never see them again. Forever. They're going to be gone forever. Because the Lord's going to fight for you if you just keep silent. Stand still. Stand still. Stand firm and you'll see deliverance. Now, let's just picture that you're Moses standing here. Moses is standing here telling this to the people. He's saying, hey guys, cheer up. I know you thought you were coming to a funeral. You're not coming to a funeral. Let me explain to you what's really going on here. Let me tell you what's really happening. And listen, come on now. Come on, everybody. Keep the faith. Keep your heads up. Let me explain to you. Just stand still here and God's going to deliver you. I mean, it's all going to be okay. I promise you, you're going to see the salvation of the Lord. These Egyptians, you'll never see them again forever. Now, if I'm standing there in Moses' shoes on that, this still hasn't happened. We know the rest of the story. Moses is standing there in this relationship with God, this confidence, this trust in him, and he's saying this, and I believe he must be saying to God, please back me up on this. I know you told me this, please back me up on this. Because you know what Moses was standing there with as his weapon? What was it? A stick. I'm going to call it a stick. I know it was a rod. It was a shepherd's rod it was a stick. He's standing there with a stick. Now, if you were paying attention earlier, what kind of, in the first set of chariots that Pharaoh was bringing, what were they called? His best. Do you remember reading it? It's in there. You can go back up and read it if you fell asleep during that time. The best, 600 of the best, and then all the others. You know what that means? That means Pharaoh was coming with his hoopties and his hummers. He was coming to get them with all of them. Everything that would move behind a horse, he was bringing it. And Moses standing there with a stick in front of the people going, hey, don't worry about those guys in their hummers back there coming up on us, man. You see the hoopties too, don't you? Come on. We got God on our side. He's going to destroy those guys. I mean, can you imagine being in that situation and Moses standing there with his rod in his hand and acting so confident that God's going to take care of this whole deal whenever you can hear in the background, clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. Horses sound like that, don't they? If this is my older set of kids, they'd go, Dad, do that again, just to hear me say it and then make fun of me, okay? So, so here's the deal. The deal is, it seems like an impossible situation. A stick. But he had enough faith to speak and to stand what he believed God was telling him to do. Look at verse 15. Now, I'm going to tell you, if you have ever read this story before and you didn't catch verse 15, it's going to knock your socks off, okay? I'm just telling you, this is like a verse that you're going, I didn't see this coming. I did not see this coming. Then the Lord said to Moses, after he gave this brilliant speech to the people of confidence and faith, the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Man, I'm going to tell you, I don't want to say what I'm thinking about here because we're talking about God. But if someone other than God had set me up to do something this significant, and then I turn to them for a little bit of encouragement or help, and they go, what are you looking at me for? I would feel like slapping them. Now, I'm not even thinking about slapping God. I'm not even saying it, but I'm saying, here, God's brought him out here with all these grumbling slaves who are horrible at being able to even see, any possibility in anything. And Moses just looking to God for a little backup, and God's going, what are you looking at me for? Man, that seems absolutely unbelievable. But let's go ahead and finish reading. He said, tell the sons of Israel, go forward. And as for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. Now, he says, what are you crying out to me for? Just tell them, get moving. Just start walking. What are you doing? Stand here talking to me. Go ahead and start moving. It almost seems like a contradiction because it's like he's saying, stand still and watch this happen. And let me explain what I think is really going on here in just a minute. But he's saying, tell the Israelites to move on. Don't stand here and look at me. Don't stand here and, with your teeth in your mouth and going, just get going. Go ahead and start going. See, we have a tendency to stand still when we should be moving on. We also sometimes have a tendency to move on when we should be standing still. You go, man, you're confusing the daylights out of me. What are we supposed to do? Stand still or move on? I'm going to suggest we're supposed to do both. But you can be on the right path and still get run over. There's that sense in which when we're following God, yes, I think that what happens is we stand still in the sense that our trust, our confidence, our faith, the peace we have, but we make all the progress that we can as we understand what it is that we can do. We take the steps forward. So what happens is we do this role reversal with God. We want to move when he tells us stand still. We want to stand still when he tells us to move because it's just that nature in us. We want to do it the way we want to do it. How many of you can remember way, way back when you learned how to drive? Okay, the rest of you wake up because I know you can remember. The rest of you too young. You guys are lazy. This morning, you won't raise your hand. I'm gonna bring in some Pentecostals in here and get you fired up so you get your hands up in the air. Good grief. So here's the deal. I started learning to drive, as I mentioned, pretty young, But I can remember the very first time that I ever got behind the wheel of a car, and something made a lot of logical sense to me. I have 2 feet, and there are 2 pedals. So I would, I'm thinking, I'll use this pedal for, the one's over here on the right side, one's on the left. I'll use my feet for that. And I remember my older brother telling me, don't do that. And he's 4 years older than I am, so he was already driving at that time. He goes, don't do that. I said, well, why not? I mean, there's 2 feet and 2 brakes, there's 2 pedals. This is the way. He goes, well, go ahead and do it. And so, you know what happened? I'm sitting there acting like the car was had a clutch in it or something, jerking it back and forth, going, but because it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work. And so I believe in God's economy, somehow he wants us to learn how to brake and go forward at the same time. It's a little different than driving a car. He wants us to stand still before him. He wants us to be quiet before him. He wants us to have that sense of trust in him, to be still on the inside, and yet we're taking steps forward toward what we know to be doing. But we're still on the inside. We're moving on the outside. Peace on the inside, progress on the outside. See, all of us have to make this decision. This is a decision that I've made. I have to keep making it. I'm trying to continue making it even to this day, and that is that I want to head toward freedom with the uncertainty that it carries rather than living with certainty in slavery, with the predictability of slavery. I want in my life to take the adventure, the God knows best idea, and even with all the uncertainty of that, head into that life of freedom that offers rather than living with the predictability of past sins or of past failures of slavery that might seem comfortable to some degree, but at the same time only keeps us in the place we shouldn't be. So many times we put ourselves in situations that we're kind of in over our heads. And so we tend to think that, freedom is something other than it really is. I don't know if you have ever had your kids fuss a little bit about going to bed before you do, or anything like that, and saying, hey, I want to stay up late, and why do you guys get to stay up late? I want to stay up late too, and all that. Well, sometimes having an explanation for a kid like that isn't always the answer because, I believe in today's culture, every kid was born with the capability of being a lawyer. I mean, they come out of the womb arguing. All right, they already have more answers and more whatever. I mean, it seems like it's different. I mean, when we were kids, we were just dumb blocks. We didn't know how to argue. We just went yes sir, no sir. We just did what we were told to do. I know it's over exaggeration, but I'm saying these guys are smart. They know how to argue young, and so so sometimes you have to take it a little more extreme measure to get your point across. And so, the one that I have used sometimes has been when they're trying to negotiate this kind of deal, like staying up late or something like that. I say, tell you what, when you can pay all the bills in the house, then you can make the decisions here, okay? You get to make the decisions when I go to bed and when you go to bed. You'll make those decisions. But until then, since I'm the one paying the bills, I'm gonna make decisions. So sometimes that's not a very good answer. So what you have to do is give them realism. And so you start by saying, well, let's just go over some of the bills. So you start listing some of the bills out. You pick the biggest month of the electric bill, for the year, and you use that one. And then you use a grocery bill and you use this bill and go, do you have that money? Then you can start pointing out furniture around the house and going, do you know how much that piece costs? Now you always have to round up, okay? Round up. Because you want to get this number as big as you can. And at the end of the day, by the time they're kind of like standing there with their eyes like this and going, okay, when you can pay one of those bills, even one of those bills, then you get to stay up as late as you want to. See, the deal is we often think we're capable of doing things we're not all that capable of doing. And there's a reason God has us in the place that we do. See, freedom isn't what you think it is. You don't like having parents be your boss. That's okay. And you don't like your boss bossing you around. That's okay too. And You just have a collection agent bossing you around. And if you don't like the collection agent bossing you around, you have a police coming trying to boss you around. If you don't like the police, then you have a warden bossing you around. I mean, you can't get away from bosses. You just got to choose your boss, okay? And so if you start off with making God your boss, you're in a much better place, because then it sort of affects how everything else goes, how you act. See, these people are going, man, we had food in Egypt. I mean, we had something to eat in Egypt. Yeah, we worked hard, but we knew we'd get as long as we didn't do something real stupid, we'd get to live out in life. Out here, these guys are coming after us. We are done. Now, we're about ready to reach the climax of this story here, and it is awesome. Why don't you just say to someone beside you, the Bible is so awesome. I want you to say it to them, okay? Bible is awesome. I mean, if you don't believe the Bible is awesome, then I don't know how to, this is just like, I just have to tell you, even this week, sometimes digging through this stuff, I just almost have to go take a break or something. Like, it's just like, you got to be kidding me. This is so incredible. Verse 15, Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. As for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. As for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will be honored, I'll be exalted, I'll be glorified, I'll be lifted up through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord, whom I am honored when I am honored through Pharaoh, through his chariots and his horsemen. You know, sometimes in this situation where we're like standing still, moving forward, he said, stand still and watch what I'm going to do. He didn't mean don't go ahead and start walking toward the water. He just meant you keep your eyes wide open. You see what's going to go on here. I'm going to do something really terrific. Now go ahead, keep moving. And I think sometimes we get a little bit stuck there and we're thinking, I'm going to let God do it all. I'm going to let him do everything. And I would just like to say, quit waiting on God to make your wife love you. Let me give you a hint. Clean up, take a shower, take her out to dinner someplace. Put a shirt on with buttons on it. You better move. You got to move. Move on. Do something. And so, sometimes we look at a situation, we say, this is impossible. This will never happen. This will never work out. What can you do to make it go forward? One of my prayer projects, one of the things I do as a prayer project is, like I've told you, it's Dunkin' Donut time with God. That's generally like an hour block of time where I'm sitting with God, and it's not my devotions or anything else. It's a complete different kind of mode of prayer, because it's a lot of listening. And it's sitting something, it's typically in that mode, I have a mountain in front of me. I have something that I cannot see my way through. I can't see it around, I can't see under it, can't see over it, can't see through it. I don't know how to get there. But what I do is I have two columns, and I have a column that says, that state, first of all, I state what the mountain is on a sheet of paper. Then I have a column that says, this is what I can do to help move this mountain. And sometimes there's one thing, sometimes there's 10 things. But at least that's what I can do. Over here this is the stuff I don't know what to do. And so God, you're going to have to show me. You're going to have to give me insight. You're going to have to help me see. And that's the slow list. Because over a period of time, God begins to bring ideas and thoughts. It's not always in that hour of prayer either. Oftentimes, it's days, even weeks later, that the list begins to fill in. And I begin to see my way through and around. But in the meantime, if I wait to do this side where I know what to do, I notice that God's pretty silent on this one over here, on this column here. So we have to do what we can do. So we need to quit waiting for God to make our marriage better. Let's start making it better. We need to stop waiting for God to make our kids better. Let's stand before God between them and pray for them. You may not be able, especially if they're a certain age and beyond, you may not be able to control anything, but you can pray. I can just promise you in my life, I have many times literally felt almost the physical force of my mom's prayers in my life. And so there are so many things that you can do. Do what you can do and trust God to help you with what you can't do. God said, move on. Move on. Watch and see how I'm going to do, because there's things you can't do, but I'm going to do it, but you got to get moving if you want to see it happen. Start moving. Why don't you turn to someone beside you and say, get moving. That's uncomfortable, isn't it? especially if you don't know the person. And even if you know them real well, you might get slapped, Get moving. Like, I'll show you, get moving, So here's the deal. I want you to say it to yourself, but it's a little easier to say it to somebody else, isn't it? Get moving. Move on. See, we take the opposition to mean that God's against us. See, the Israelites are standing there and they're looking at the opposition coming and they're going, look, God is against us. Everything's going down. And God's saying, whoa, wait a minute. You don't get it. I have the opposition coming here so I can show you my glory. We think opposition is there to do us in. God's saying, I'm just wanting to show you how powerful I am. I want to show you the purposes I have. Don't let the opposition distract you from what I'm calling you to do. Do it. I want to show my glory. Verse 16, he says to Moses, he says, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. Stretch out your hand. Faith is about stretching out what you have. What do you have? You say, I don't have much of anything. Well, I'm going to have to tell you, if I were Moses standing there with that staff and those guys are bringing their Hummers in, I wouldn't feel like I had much either. God said, that staff I gave you, take your hand and stretch it out. Stretch it out. You have to use what you have before God will perform the miracles. You have to use what you have. So many times we're so concerned that God's going to rip us off. So we clutch what we have. We hold it tight. And we think we'll preserve it for something. And God's saying, hey man, until you just wake up, put it out there, put it to use, put it on the line. I can't do much. You're not moving on. You're just standing still. Move on. Stretch your hand out. Faith is about stretching out what you have. Let's go on down to verse 19. The angel of the Lord who had been going before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them. Oh boy, that sounds really fun, doesn't it? Here he's had this visible sign of God being in front of him by the cloud, the pillar cloud at day and pillar of fire by night. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. What poor timing. Right at the point you have these enemies coming behind you and God saying move forward, and all of a sudden the very thing he's been leading you with disappears. The cloud and the pillar of fire is gone. He moved it, and he moved it behind them. Why is it that sometimes it seems as though God removes the physical evidence of his presence at the time we feel like we need it the most? When they need God's guidance in front of them, he's saying move on. He moves behind them. And let me just say this. Let's look at verse 20. So it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel, and there was a cloud along with the darkness, yet it gave light at night. Thus the one did not come near the other all night. So one was covered in darkness by the cloud, the other was covered with light. And they couldn't see each other. See, just because you see a decrease in God's visibility does not mean his power or his presence or his ability is diminished. Just because you see a decrease in his visibility does not mean that his power, that his presence, or his ability is diminished. He moved behind them. There's a phrase that I want you to think about. I want you to carry with you. I want you to leave with it today. God's got your back. He's got your back. I know we love it when he's out in front of us and we're following that pillar of that fire. Boy, man, we're on a good track. God's leading us. Man, this is awesome. Look how it's going. Sometimes he moves behind us. He says, got your back. See, it's not by sight. It's by faith. God has your back. Could you say to someone beside you, God has your back? Do you believe it? Do you believe that God has your back? See, listen to this carefully. Sometimes God says, follow me, I'm right behind you. Man, I don't like that. I'm like, get in front of me. Get in front of me. Verse 21, the backside of your sheet. Moses stretched out his hands over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, turned the sea into dry land, so the waters were divided. Be encouraged by the character of God. I want you to be encouraged by the character of God. He does what he says he will do. See, when God is fighting for you, all possibilities are there. I'm gonna read down through the rest of this, and I want you to follow along carefully. If you want to, you can even read out loud with me if you're looking from a sheet or PowerPoint, so it'll be the same words. The sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on the dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Then the Egyptians took up the pursuit, and all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen went in after them into the midst of the sea. At the morning watch, but God always likes to wait till the last minute, doesn't he? You ever feel that way? Why, God, why do we always have to do this at the last minute? It's called faith, part of it. At the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and the cloud and brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion. He caused their chariot wheels to swerve. He made them drive with difficulty. They were trying to drive with both feet. So the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians." Well, I'll come back to that, okay? Just don't forget that for a minute. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The sea returned to its normal state of daybreak while the Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, even Pharaoh's entire army that got into the sea after them. Not even one of them remained. But the sons of Israel walked in dry land through the midst of the sea, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and hid in his servant Moses. A couple thoughts, and we're closing. When God is fighting for you, he can take the wheels off of your enemy, okay? I mean, just believe it. God's people, and this is such an amazing thought to me, God's people were trying to get away from the enemy. And you notice in the story, then all of a sudden the enemy's trying to get away from God's people. They're saying, God is fighting for these people. Let's get out of here. But they were too deep in. They couldn't escape. The very people that they were running from started running from them. See, our God is the God of a turnaround. You need a turnaround in your life right now? You need something to change. He's a God of a turnaround. You have to move into the middle on your way to freedom. But maybe you're under attack along the way. Just remember, he's already won the war. He's already won the war. Now, the children of Israel, probably Moses is the author of this, wrote a song. I'm not going to read the whole song, but I'm going to ask the band to come up and get situated right now, if they would, while we're doing this. So band members, come on. Everybody else, if you'd stand to your feet, and I want you to read these words aloud with me, okay? This is a song that they wrote after this had happened, and a song of it, and I may make a comment or two along the way, but I want you to read with me. Then Moses and the sons of Israel sang this song to the Lord and said, here, let's do it together. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song. He has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has cast into the sea, and the choicest of his officers are drowned in the Red Sea. The deeps cover them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, is majestic in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the enemy. I'm going to tell you today, if you hear the enemy coming behind you, some past sin, some past habit, some past relationship, some past whatever it might be, and it's coming, you're running to freedom, and you feel the hoofs and the heat of the horses of the enemy coming after you. I want you to remember, even if the enemy is approaching, in that time, Moses held out his right hand And not only did he hold out his right hand, but God stretched out his right hand. Your memory verse, your right hand, O Lord, is majestic in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the enemy. Never forget it. Yeah.